for joining us today. Welcome to BRHP In Conversation. We're very excited to be joined by Brooke Lierman, Maryland's Comptroller and a dedicated public servant. Please note that the discussion is being recorded. We're going to be placing all the online attendees on mute for the discussion, but feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us where you're from, geographically based, and what you hope to learn in today's conversation. Here in the room, we are joined by BRHP staff, several clients, including those who are on our client advisory board, as well as several board of director members. I am Adria Crutchfield, and I'm the executive director of the Baltimore Regional Housing Partnership. BRHP is a Baltimore-based nonprofit with the mission of expanding housing choices for families with low incomes who have historically been excluded from areas of opportunity in well-resourced neighborhoods. As the regional administrator of the Baltimore Housing Mobility Program, BRHP couples the Housing Choice Voucher with the housing counseling services to support over 4,300 families, helping them to transition successfully to safe, healthy, and economically vibrant communities here throughout the Baltimore region. An important part of ensuring that these successful transitions continue is addressing the state's housing shortage. Comptroller Lierman's office has created the state's first ever State of the Economy report, which provides some of the connections between the state's need for more affordable housing and the economy, especially as it relates to workforce housing and business development, which ultimately means more revenue to the state to provide better services for Maryland families. We're excited to get into a conversation about the findings of this report, as well as the overall work of the Comptroller's office. We'll have a Q&A session towards the end where you may ask questions. Please feel free to drop those questions into the chat. If you are online, you can raise your hand here if you are in the audience here in our office today. So now let me turn to our guest of honor. Brooke Lierman is the state's 34th comptroller and the first woman to be independently elected to one of our state's constitutional offices. An attorney by training, Brooke practiced as a civil rights and disability rights lawyer for many years at Brown, Goldstein, and Levy. The law firm, along with the ACLU of Maryland and the NAACP Legal Defense Fund that successfully prosecuted the Thompson v. HUD fair housing lawsuit, which led to the creation of the Baltimore Housing Mobility Program and BRHP.
So I'm like BRHP adjacent.
Totally. Prior to her election as comptroller, Brooke served for 8 years as a member of the House of Delegates representing parts of Southeast Baltimore City, including neighborhoods like Federal Hill, Highlandtown, Patterson Park. Welcome, Brooke.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I've never been in these offices, and I've heard so much about BRHP for so long and followed your work. And so I'm just really grateful for the leadership that you have provided, as well as your council and your board members. So thank you all so much for your work. I think the work you're doing is important on many different levels, right? At the individual family level, you're changing lives and changing futures. But I think also at a national level, people are watching what's happening here and seeing how successful it is. And that's really exciting. So thank you for all you're doing.
Yeah. So we're going to dive right in if that's okay.
Okay.
To start things off, can you talk to us about how your office is working to support policy development with your new initiative to produce these economic research reports? For example, in 2023, you launched the first ever State of the Economy report to offer policymakers and the public data and research on the state's challenges and opportunities. So how do you hope this tool is being used to influence policy?
Sure. So I'll back up for 1 second. And I'm going to assume that not everybody on this room or on the Zoom would get a 100% on a test if the only question was, what does the Maryland Comptroller do? Because nobody does. But it's a really interesting role where you're it's the elected CFO of the state, right? And the different components of the role are, one, in that elected CFO role, we're measuring the balance, we're tracking our balance sheet, we're balancing the books, we're paying employees, we're providing revenue estimates, so we're the economist of the state. The second key role is that I sit on a number of boards and commissions, the Board of Public Works, which oversees all of our procurement, our state retirement and pension board, and more. And then the third role is that I am everybody's favorite government official. I'm the tax collector. Tax refunder. So that's really the building blocks of the job. And when I was a member of the House of Delegates representing this area where we are sitting and more, in fact, every neighborhood around the water, I I always felt like there was just a lack of information about the economics of Maryland. And it was very hard to find good objective data on what was happening in the economy, in different sectors of the economy. So you can find that at the national level, because there's so many think tanks that are doing this work at the national level. And we've got the Congressional Budget Office as well and others. But at the state level, it was very hard to come by this data. And when I decided to run for comptroller, it was really because I wanted to reimagine what the office of the comptroller could do within those three roles, right? Those are the building blocks of the job, and you have to decide what you're going to create, what you're going to build. And so when I became comptroller, shortly thereafter, we 3 times a year have a meeting of what's called the Board of Revenue Estimates, the BRE. So BRE makes an official declaration of what our state's revenues are going to be, what we're bringing in for our general fund. And that's what informs the governor and the General Assembly on how much they have to spend. Like, we measure the purse strings, right? And that's what they build their budget against. But our revenues just weren't growing. They were not growing, and they hadn't grown in several years. And it was sort of befuddling to everybody. And on the other hand, our costs were increasing, right? So I said, we've got to have a better understanding of why our revenues aren't growing. And that's what led to the State of the Economy report. We took 9 months. Danny DePietro sitting here as our policy research director, my deputy comptroller, Ben Siegel, and our BRE team worked for 9 months getting around the state, talking to business leaders, talking to folks who are hiring, community development professionals, and more about what they were seeing and what they weren't seeing. And then we looked at our numbers that we were seeing as well, and we produced this report. And the goal of it, when we released it in January 2024, was really to just sort of provide a baseline. Like, here is where Maryland is in the immediate post-pandemic space. Here's what happened during the pandemic, and here's where we are, right? So it includes information through 2023. And things have started changing since it came out, which is good, because where we were was not very good. We had some of the lowest GDP growth in the nation. I think ours was around 1%, where the nation over those few years had grown over 11%. We had real challenges in the labor sector. We did not have the labor force participation rate that we had before the pandemic. And we saw different reasons for this, some of which we got into. But we're also tracking in this, I think it's the first document from the state government, we're actually starting to talk about the cost of living in Maryland, which is rising and challenging for everybody who lives here. So we decided this was our baseline document. We learned a lot in it from producing it, and I think we shared a lot of important data. But then we realized we needed to do more. And so I'm sure we'll get into it, but we started producing additional reports sort of based on this initial report as the baseline.
Awesome. So yes, she keeps pointing down to the table because here is the big report.
Yeah.
For those who may not have yet read it.
Shame on you. Just kidding.
What would you say are some of those key takeaways that you just started to hit on?
Sure. Yes. So some key takeaways were some of the economic stagnation that we saw. During the pandemic, federal employment grew and federal government grew, but our private sector really stagnated. And we also saw a total flatlining of our population. And it was really challenging then, because you don't have the labor force for private employers to hire, to grow. And there were 3 jobs available for every 1 job seeker in Maryland. In the rest of the country, there were like 1.5 jobs for every 1 job seeker. So it was a real challenge to hire if you were an employer, and that constrained economic growth in the state. So in addition, what we saw was that we became part of the national trend. And this is a national trend, it's not just Maryland, where we are seeing for really the first time in history, folks moving from high cost of living areas to low cost of living areas. It used to be, and I think sort of the tradition that we all grew up with, was people move to opportunity, right? And I don't mean that in the housing sense, right? They move to the cities, they move to places where there's more jobs, right? They move to a New York City, they move to a San Francisco, but now we are not seeing that anymore. There has been a complete reversal in housing trends where we're seeing people move away from those areas. And it is because they're so expensive. People cannot afford to live there. Even if there is a job for them, the job does not pay what they would need to afford to live there. And we're seeing that in Maryland. So we have folks from New York and New Jersey and DC moving to Maryland because we're lower cost of living than those places. But we are losing residents to the Carolinas, Virginia, Florida, because they are lower cost of living. And a really big piece of this is housing, right? I mean, housing is the biggest cost that any of us have, right? And that anybody has. That is where most of our money goes. Sometimes childcare is a close second, but we won't talk about that right now. We have a whole other report on that. But housing is really central to this and this discussion and to solving this challenge. And so we do talk about, the challenge of housing and housing costs and housing production a little bit in this report as well. We talk a lot about population growth or loss as well. We have an aging population in Maryland too. We're not attracting new people. People are not staying here as well. So that's a challenge, but it really does for me. I mean, I think so much of what we need to all be talking about and focusing on is cost of living. And it's a real challenge in Maryland right now.
So on that note, can you speak a little more to the housing shortage that is actually impacting the overall state economy?
Sure, absolutely. So there is a housing shortage in Maryland. I hope I'm not the first person to say that to you. I don't think I am. But we are about 90,000 units behind where we should be. We built half as many units in the 2010s as we did in the 1970s, even though we had population growth in the 2010s and we are a bigger population. So we are just really underbuilding what we need to house not just who lives here, but who wants to live here, right? I think sometimes we think about too much about folks who already live here, and we plan for people who already live here without thinking about the fact that we actually want to be recruiting people to live here. We want people to move to Maryland. We have amazing resources. Yes, that all comes along with needing to build more schools and more spaces and more infrastructure, but we want to make sure that we keep the people who are here, and we want to allow for more folks. Like, we want our kids to be able to raise their families here and to afford a home here. I would have a hard time affording the home I grew up in Montgomery County now. I do not think I could. So, and I make, a good living. So it is really challenging to think about just finding the space and making space for people through all different types of housing, whether it's rental, home ownership, apartments, condos, townhouses, single family homes, and really at every level of the economic scale as well. So we really need all types. And so actually we're going to be working on, and Danny's working on our next report, which is a follow-up to our immigration childcare report, which were follow-ups to this, on housing and the economy, and really what it means to our economy to not have these houses. So that'll come out in early fall, and would encourage you to talk to Danny if you have any ideas or thoughts, or you want to schedule a time with her to chat about housing issues or challenges or ideas that you'd like to share with us.
So this may be a little premature, but this report highlights that in particular, younger people are leaving the state because of the high housing costs, while also making clear that housing affordability is interconnected with challenges, some of which you've mentioned: childcare, transportation, healthcare, especially for working women and young families. Your recent partnership with the Urban Institute focuses on increasing access to the Earned Income Tax Credit, a key anti-poverty tool in boosting family stability. Could you talk more about that effort and any additional initiatives to address the intersecting issues for low-income families in particular?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So, the housing report and these reports are sort of one wing of what we're doing in our policy research department. But we also have a huge, it's a huge agency, 1,200 people with 12 offices across the state, including one over at 7 St. Paul Street, which is our taxpayer service. We have a taxpayer services division on the first floor, and then about 300 people on the upper levels. And so we're always looking for ways to really, from our lens, bring additional resources to families and others who need them, right? That's really our goal. And so I'm thinking through thinking about it through a fiscal and financial lens. And the number, we are honored, I would say, to be the administrator for the #1 anti-poverty program that state government offers, and that is the Earned Income Tax Credit. There's no government program that has moved more people out of poverty over the long term. It is a hugely beneficial, or I should say, it's really important for increasing economic mobility. And the EITC can be thousands of dollars. It's on average $1,100, but folks can qualify for $3,000, $4,000 through it. And yet we know that well over 100,000 Marylanders who qualify for this credit don't claim it each year. And I think that's a real failure on the part of government to sort of create a benefit, but then not make sure that the people who we've created the benefit for actually can take advantage of it, right, and benefit from it. So I was, in the House when we passed the increased funding for the EITC. It's one of the most generous state EITCs in the nation. So now we are really focused on what we can do to ensure that every Marylander who qualifies for the EITC claims it. So sort of a two-part initiative. One is I created an Office of Public Engagement in the Office of the Comptroller, and we partnered with many other agencies, with nonprofits and more to get them resources to give out to their clients about the Earned Income Tax Credit and the Child Tax Credit, so they could make sure that the folks that they serve claim it. So like this morning, I spoke in Rockville at a nonprofit symposium, and many of the nonprofits were groups that we partnered with to push the information about the EITC out. And we have very preliminary numbers, but all sources point to we saw a significant increase in uptake this year, which is going to be really exciting. The second phase of this is to say, okay, let's do a deeper dive with the Urban Institute, and really understand why people aren't claiming it. So Urban does qualitative research through roundtables and discussions, and they are doing these discussions with folks to really sort of understand and walk through whether people are aware of it, why aren't they aware of it, if they are aware of it, why aren't they claiming it, what are all the reasons, so that we can create a playbook, not just for me and not just for Maryland, but for every state tax administrator to take with actionable steps that they can use to increase EITC uptake in their state. So I'm part of this really crazy group called the Federation of Tax Administrators. They're party animals, as you can imagine. But so we have a national conference every year, the Federation of Tax Administrators Conference, and it's in June this year. And I will be sort of presenting with the Urban Institute on our initial findings, so that we can share with them, these other tax administrators and dedicated public servants across the country, what they can do to increase EITC uptake and make sure that people in their states are also getting these benefits, because almost every state has its own EITC. So we're really excited about that because I really do believe in the EITC and its value. Just share one really quick story. A couple of years ago, I was at an event when I'd just been sworn in. It was EITC, I don't know, Awareness Day or something. And there was this wonderful woman who spoke, and she talked about the fact that she had gone to the Cash Campaign of Maryland, which is an amazing nonprofit partner, and realized that she was eligible for the EITC. She'd never claimed it before. So she claimed it that year. She got, several $1,000s. She used that money to enroll in community college classes. And by the time I met her, several years later, she made so much money that she didn't qualify for the EITC anymore. Awesome. That is so powerful to me, and such an important story to share with folks, so they understand how important this tax credit can be to individual families and to changing lives.
Well, I really applaud the partnership effort that your office is taking. Just hearing that statistic about 100,000 folks not claiming it makes me think housing providers probably could be partners in this effort too.
Yes, sure.
And so definitely taking a mental note to do some follow-up with my team around ensuring our families are taking advantage of the EITC. We recently did a similar endeavor with Healthcare Access Maryland to ensure that folks are enrolled in health insurance that they would qualify for. Yep. So Similar. That's awesome work. Your office recently joined Mayor Scott and Secretary Day for the launch of the Baltimore Vacancy Reinvestment Initiative. Could you tell us why this is significant to Baltimore and the region?
Sure. So there are many different ways to combat the housing crisis. One, of course, in Baltimore is that we have 15,000 homes that are vacant, and we need to make sure that folks can buy them. I mean, I think one of the exciting things that's happening in Baltimore is that we grew our population last year for the first time in a long time. But even before that, the year before that, our population declined, but our household number increased, which I think shows you that people are interested in moving to Baltimore if they can find space. And people in Baltimore are interested in staying here, but they also have to find the right home that fits for them. Well, so happens we have 15,000 beautiful homes that need to be rehabbed so that people can live in them and make our neighborhoods more vibrant again. So several years ago, I brought an idea to Secretary Jake Day, who's our Secretary of Housing and Community Development. I said, you know what? Many other states have community development entities, CDEs, and those CDEs can apply for new markets tax credits from the federal government to bring that money into the state of Maryland to help with redevelopment efforts. Now, it's not specifically housing. It's usually commercial, but can also include multifamily housing and more. But we did not have a state CDE. So we have several entities in Maryland who are CDEs, but many of the projects that they've applied for new markets tax credits for have been out of the states. They've been in other states around the country. So I said to Secretary Day, would you be in favor of putting in legislation to create a state CDE? And he said, yeah, sounds great. So we worked together to pass this bill. So thank you to the General Assembly and Governor Moore. We passed this bill and we've created the MCIC, the Maryland Community Investment Corporation. And the MCIC is we applied and we just had our application approved. We are now a Maryland CDE. And we are specifically focused on bringing development work to areas in Baltimore that would be eligible for the new markets tax credits, sort of lower income, haven't seen a lot of development, et cetera. In addition, we are now an entity that is sort of a pseudo-governmental entity that can work and be a little flexible and nimble to work with partners like Reinvest Baltimore and like DHCD. So we are really excited to be working with DHCD. We're very close to signing a formal memorandum of understanding with them. It's not signed yet, but we're working on it to be their partner in administering the Baltimore Vacant Rehabilitation and Redevelopment Initiative, BVRI. So BVRI is, I think last time I checked, $50 million. It won't all come to us, but it's $50 million overall to invest in vacant housing to rehab them. Now that money is eligible, some subset of that money, say 30 million, is eligible or will be deployed to CDOs, community development organizations, nonprofits who are doing work to redevelop vacant homes around the city. We, MCIC, will come in because DHCD will pick which nonprofits get the money, and then we will deploy that money. Will be sort of come to us in a chunk. We will deploy that money and then follow up with those small developers, nonprofits to help ensure that they're successful, right? And to keep track of it and to make sure that that money is really getting where it needs to be in the community. So I'm really excited about it, excited to work with Secretary Day, with Mayor Scott, with Alice Kennedy and others to make sure that this is successful. My Deputy Comptroller, Ben Siegel, is our lead at MCIC, and MCIC is going to have offices at 7 St. Paul Street as well. So it's got a really big staff of 2 people right now, but we will be beefing that up so that we can successfully deploy these funds. Yep.
Congratulations on that effort. So I asked how you were doing as you walked into our office, and you said, well, there's a lot going on. So I want to shift now to the federal landscape. And this will be my last question to you before we turn to the audience. We know that Maryland does not exist as an island, and the question that is probably top of mind for many of you all is how the actions of the White House and the federal government have impacted us and how we're going to continue, how they will continue to impact the national and state economy. and what this might mean for Marylanders, including you all, particularly those with lower incomes. So Maryland has been hit hard in the early days of the second Trump administration with major federal job cuts, creating a projected loss of $262 million in tax revenue and the potential loss of federal grants that the state budget relies upon. What ripple effects are you seeing across sectors, and how is your office responding or preparing for the broader economic impact?
Sure. Yeah, it's sobering times right now. So the first thing I'll say is that, Maryland has for decades been a willing and grateful and excited partner to our federal government, right? We have 250,000 Maryland households receive federal wages. And we also have, I think FY24, we got over 760 unique federal grants totaling over $20 billion. We also then have contractors. My agency did a report to study and learn about our procurement economy last year, and 10% of our GDP is federal contracts. And the largest ones are Department of Defense, VA, HHS. So there's sort of three different levels of direct federal exposure, we'll say. Now it's exposure. I would have in the previous administration said partnership, right? We think it's really important to understand the numbers so that we can sort of assess the assets. I said to somebody the other day, it's like we're getting a divorce and we have to count all the money that's at stake before we pivot to a new partner. But that really is it. I mean, I see this as we need to understand the impact that the federal government has on our economy and on our funding streams, so that then we can say, okay, this is where we're vulnerable. This is where we've been. Let's think about what we can do to ensure that we're pivoting that to the private sector. So I'll give you one example would be, we know that federal government employees in Maryland are incredibly highly educated. They have master's degrees, they have PhDs, they're scientists at NIH. They work in, the highest levels of HHS and elsewhere, the CDC, and more. We also have a really amazing biotech industry in Maryland, right? So we have to think about if HHS and if NIH are going to start contracting, how are we going to make sure that those scientists and medical researchers can find new jobs in Maryland, right? And so we are going to have to work with our life sciences industry partners to ensure that they are ready or willing or interested in hiring, right? So that we can keep some of these folks. Now, I want to applaud the governor. He and his team are really digging in on what they've identified as lighthouse industries like quantum, cyber, biotech, really industries in Maryland where we have that expertise, whether it's working for the federal government or already working for the private sector. And so putting state resources into those industries ensures that we can keep some of those people in Maryland, which is so important. So we're actually working to produce a report that will outline, and really more than outline, it will fill in the outline, really digs in to quantify the impact of that the federal government has on Maryland. We will release that in June. But it's really gonna be a hard look at where these assets are, so that then we can use that to pivot, right? That'll be part one. And then part two will be up to our entire government to help make sure that we can pivot appropriately. Yeah.
Well, as I just mentioned, we're going to take some questions both from our online audience and here in the room. So I will ask Emily to read a few questions starting online, and then we'll shift to the room.
Yes, and as we mentioned in the chat, if you do have any questions, please type them in the chat now. Now is the time. We just have really one comment at this time with a question comment. This person says, that they've been a BRHP voucher holder for 11 years. They currently reside in Baltimore County in the process of moving. And to rent a home in opportunity areas has become very challenging. Most property owners are looking for renters with six-figure incomes, which makes it hard for low-income renters like myself and many and many others. So I think just raising up the point that you made, Comptroller, about the importance of the housing at various income levels. And I think anything further you want to expand upon around that.
Sure. I think we're in this really interesting place right now where we both see some people leaving Maryland or choosing not to come here at all because housing prices are so expensive. But then we also have a number of people who are stuck in place because they have a mortgage rate that's at a 2 or 3%. So even if they wanted to move, if they then could only buy a home that's at 7% mortgage interest rate, it's too expensive, right? It's more expensive perhaps than what they are paying right now, which means that our housing market is it's in a really challenged place. One of the things that we're seeing, for instance, is, we have obviously across the country, baby boomer generation is huge. Many of them are folks who would probably like to downsize, right? But they own their homes outright now. And so and they can't afford to move into a smaller home because I see people agreeing, yes, they cannot afford to move into a smaller home that then would create a housing opportunity for a young family to move into that home where they raised their kids, right? So we are just not seeing the churn that we used to see, which is another challenge. And I think that, this person is speaking to it. It's so, people are feeling really challenged at all levels. And certainly that hits those in the lowest income category the hardest because they have the least options. It's just all a symptom of this sort of, I think, inability or challenge to build and to grow in Maryland.
Any other questions online?
There is just one new question, which is you were talking about the Baltimore vacants. This person says in Baltimore, we have some investors who are delinquent with property taxes. Is there a plan for dealing with that aspect of the vacant home?
Yeah.
These people who they are owned, but someone is
right.
not paying.
It's a great question. And boy, is that a problem. That is a huge problem in Baltimore. It is massive. So that is really city DHCD. So it is up to the city to figure out how to, cite, enforce at a higher and more stringent level to make people pay what they're supposed to owe. These out-of-state investors, and if they're not keeping their properties up to cite them until they finally throw their hands up and they want to get rid of the property. And then the city needs to buy it if there isn't somebody who's going to be responsible and come in and rehab it, right? But look, I think we need the city to be incredibly aggressive about these out-of-state investors because look, I've seen it so much just in some of the neighborhoods that I recommended in Southeast Baltimore. These numbers are not correct, but so don't quote me on this. But I think I represented Elwood Park, which is a great neighborhood. But in my 8 years there, I think my memory is that it went from something like 80% owner occupied and 20% renting to flipping to almost 30% owner occupied and 70% rented and owned by out-of-state investors often. I think it's fine to have renters, to have owners who don't live in their home, but it's a problem if you're letting the home go downhill, right? If you're not taking care of things. And then it's up to the person who's living there and renting to continue to fix things, which, that's not what they signed up for. So, and it can be a blight on the whole neighborhood. So I think this is the city DHCD, that will be their role in the Reinvest Baltimore initiative. So, yep.
Questions in the room. If you just raise your hand. Go ahead, Ms. Mitchell.
So I heard you talking about, I had to go online, so I can look it up a little bit about the MCIC. And I also heard you say that it's money basically put to the side for these nonprofit organizations. And you said not all of it is for housing. But one of the biggest challenges that we do have is housing.
Sure.
Particularly, I'm a little biased because of course I love BRHP.
Yeah.
But what does that look like for the actual residents in Maryland that are low income? what I'm trying to say is like when at some point, maybe not right now because it's very new. What does it look like in the future for it to be returned to the residents like us? Like it's a lot of us single mothers. We're ready for these type of things where we can take on being able to stay here and be homeowners and things like that. But we don't have the funding for it.
Right.
You get what I'm saying? It's very hard to get a first time homeowners loan and things like that.
Yep.
In order for us to graduate off an amazing program like this,
Yeah.
but it's not a lot of things for us to fall back on. So what does that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's sort of two, I'll give you a few answers, okay? So the first is I think there's two pieces to the home housing market. One is what people make, like how, making sure that they make enough to afford a monthly mortgage payment. And the second is how much the housing costs, right? So right now we're here, right? People aren't making enough and the housing cost is too high. Part of the reason the housing cost is too high is because we're not building. So we've got to build more so the housing costs can come down. And then the second component, of course, making sure wages continue to rise, right? And that people can afford homes, right? I think right now the average medium home price in the country or in Maryland is over $420,000, right? It's a lot. And that has increased so much in the past few years. So that's one, is we've got to focus both on increasing housing affordability and ensuring that folks' real wages are actually meeting where they need to be. The second piece is that not every government program is for everything, right? So BVRI is specifically Baltimore Vacant Rehabilitation Initiative, that's right, Reinvestment Initiative. BVRI is specifically about rehabbing the vacants themselves. It's about producing more, it's about ensuring that those homes can be returned to the market, which helps that first problem that I talked about, right? We're not building enough, so there's not enough, there's scarcity, and so there's not, the price is too high. So we need to ensure that those 15,000 vacant homes can return to the market and can be purchased by somebody, right? That's what BVRI is about. There's other programs within the Department of Housing and Community Development, though, that do address sort of helping first-time homebuyers, mortgage help, and then there's loan programs as well. There's also great CDCs around the city. Like I know specifically the Southeast CDC has a housing counselor program where they will help individuals get ready to purchase their own home and set sort of, here are the steps we need to take. We have to work on credit. We've got to work on savings. We got to identify homes. We got to identify government programs that you'd be eligible for, things like that. So there are those programs as well. So it's sort of a dual part answer, but there are sort of this component, this program is specifically about that housing piece. And then there's other programs that are about the helping the buyers piece. I hope that helps explain.
Thank you for that question.
Yeah.
Yes, in the back.
Hey, two questions to it. But I would first start with my first question is I know you said that your office is creating a subdivision for public engagement, and so I know you said they will assist other divisions, get the information out. Now that's fine, that's key. But my question is, will your public engagement office also be responsible for getting the information out? Because I know getting the information to other divisions, other organizations, that would be great so they can get it to their tenants and stuff like that, or people who are part of separate organizations. But I know sometimes they still got to handle their bottom line as well. I like the idea of the public engagement office where people can get the information, but I just want to know, bro, you guys focus on getting the information out yourself as well, just so we get
Sure. Yeah, no, they have to be strategic. There's only 6 of them for the whole state.
Yeah.
So, I have one person who covers Baltimore City, Baltimore County, and Howard County, right? So it's not like we don't have unlimited resources. But yes, they table at fairs and they'll go to neighborhood events and town halls, and they'll bring all their materials that they have. So for sure, they are absolutely meeting people in different locations, but it can also be, I think, a strategic use of their time to partner with agencies and nonprofits that are already out there in the community doing things and who already have connections and frankly, who are already trusted partners, right? So we're trying to do both. Yeah.
Right. Well, oh yeah, that's just my question for the
Yep.
dual capability, so just having
Yep.
both options. My second question will be, I know you focused a lot and you say about the employment sector and the housing and how they both go hand in hand. I actually agree. I also heard when you said that a few years ago, I think that you said that the federal level of the employment, you know, it was rising and stuff like that, and during the pandemic, and it was going good. And but now the return now, and you know, it's declining now and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so it's like everything is in a reversal for things that were going up then or
You're
going
right.
down. Right. And so if you catch my drift. And so my question is, like, I hear you guys focusing a lot, and of course, like not right now, but you know, I pay attention like to the media.
Yeah.
So like, I hear the governor as well talk about, you know, employment for the federal workers, and you know, helping them strengthen back up their the economic, you know, market for or whatever like that. Now that's great, you know, for the workers, you know, to, you know, get back into work and, you know, help sustain the economic, you know, market. But if we're building all of this housing, you know, in the city and in the county, it's going to fill up housing, of course, you know, for the federal workers and for new residents into the city. But for new residents that are coming into the city, and for residents that are in the city and that are in the county, or that's on the whole state, will you guys be working on a plan in the future to strengthen the employment game for all Marylanders that aren't on the federal level or whatever like that? Because I'm looking at, okay, well, we have this housing and we get these people into this housing, will they be also able to sustain their housing as well?
Yep.
Without that job market growing as well on a more level, on the, you know, on a more moderate level.
No, I get what you're saying. So yes, of course, whenever the government does initiatives around workforce development, it's open to everybody. We're not just saying you can only apply if you're a former federal worker or current federal worker. So yes, so there've been a ton of job fairs, especially in Montgomery County and Prince George's County, that are being, you know, the most hard hit, frankly. And anybody can go to those, right? Anybody is willing. Anybody who's willing can go. The second piece of that is there's quite a few different ways that the state is trying to work with local governments and private sector partners to create different programs to build our workforce. So number one is through apprenticeships. Number two is actually in state government jobs. I will tell you, like 95% of my jobs don't require a college degree. We hire you and we train you. I promise. I have someone looking skeptically at me. Yes. 95% of the jobs in my agency do not require a college degree. So, you know, and that's across the state. We have also eliminated sort of that college degree requirement for many, many of our jobs, because we can hire you and train you to do a lot of that work. You can substitute, instead of a college degree, your work in the HR space when we're hiring an HR associate, right? So there's also like state employment, it's state government employment itself. And then you may have or not have heard of this, but or you may have. There's something called the Blueprint for Maryland's Future. So the Blueprint, right, was our big education reform initiative. And it was very focused on ensuring that students graduated either career or college ready, right? Ready to go into a trade, whether it's through apprenticeships, whether it's through a VOTEC school or whatnot, or ready to get to college. And so the Blueprint as well is really all about ensuring that Marylanders are graduating and putting themselves in a place where they can be successful long-term. So those are a few of the initiatives we have. Yep. Yeah, go for it.
Good afternoon. I'm asking, I'm a client of BRHP, and I was living in Baltimore City and had the opportunity to move to Baltimore County.
Mm-hmm.
I live in Westminster.
Oh.
So now because of
Carroll County?
Yeah, like right there.
Yeah.
So basically, I've been wanting to move back further in the city because some opportunities that they have for me and my children are at not as frequent unless you have a car or a vehicle to get to
Sure.
in Baltimore County where I live.
Right.
The opportunities for children and raising your children are way better, my personal opinion,
Yeah.
if you do not have a vehicle.
Right.
However, because I've been in a certain area, I do want to move into the city. However, where I used to live in Emerson Village, and other areas in Baltimore City, they have reconstructed the housing and other areas like for the seniors, they reconstructed the Giant, they closed it down. So now the issue is the closest people to go to for medication or things like that, or when the pharmacy's open 24 hours, the Giant's open for your children and things like that, they close that down. So when developers come in and reconstruct the housing situation, what guidelines, or is there a meeting or a committee to sit down with these new developers when they decide to put new buildings or things in the area? What criteria or information are they using before the developers come in and put up new housing, and then like a building that's empty, is it benefiting the community or the people that live in the community that are accessible to that housing? What criteria is being used or inputted for maybe the people that live in the community?
So great question. So Baltimore City needs all different types of housing, right? And we are zoned, each area of the city is zoned in a different way. And Baltimore City, actually, Matt Hill here from the PJC, or Adria could probably talk more about this, is the city does have some requirements for affordable housing being built at the same time when a developer comes to seek the ability to develop. They have some requirements around set-asides or funding to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund that was created. And then the city has an Affordable Housing Trust Fund that EDA can use to help make sure that they're creating affordable housing. We very much need senior housing in Baltimore City, whether it's in Edmondson Village or in Federal Hill. Like, all these areas need senior housing, affordable senior housing, and we need giants, right? So Edmondson Village, as you probably know, that shopping center, or Edmondson Village Shopping Center, was purchased by a developer who then worked with the community to give local shares to community members. So it's a community-based buying and development effort. And they are working, I thought they had already secured another grocer to come in, but maybe they haven't, or they haven't announced it yet. So they're working to redevelop that entire shopping center. It needs a facelift, right? And it needs additional options for residents who live there. So they are working, I will say, it is an incredibly slow process to raise the money that's needed to do that kind of work in the way that they're doing it, which is a really interesting and community-based way. But they are certainly, my last time I read about it was that they are very much trying hard to bring in another grocer and to rehab that entire shopping center. So that is certainly underway. But yeah, there are some requirements in the city that the city has, and some options that the city has to ensure different areas have different types of housing.
So I think we have time for just one more audience question. I'm going to go to you in the blue. If you could keep your question brief. Thank you.
My question is, when was the last time Maryland actually received a cost of living?
Maryland who? What do you mean?
Just in general, just employees working. I know when I was working for Head Start, usually we got things where it's like, okay, Maryland has a cost of living.
Oh, you mean a COLA?
Yes.
Right. So every private employer pays what it wants. Every local government pays what it wants in accordance with the collective bargaining agreement that they have with their union, usually, right? And usually, if it's public, it's AFSCME. And the state is the same. We have a collective bargaining agreement with AFSCME and AFT, and that determines when COLAs will happen, when cost of living increases, right, happen. So also when you're allowed to raise people a step or a grade, it's all spelled out in that collective bargaining agreement. But private employers are not covered by that, right? Unless they are unionized.
Right, I wasn't asking in reference to just the private, just
Okay.
Maryland in general, for cost of living. Everything is going up.
Right.
However, paychecks are not. going up.
Right.
So we have BGE that is
Yeah.
extremely high, rather you're home at night, it's freezing to death.
Yeah.
You know, trying to keep up with gas, car insurance, because of all the car thefts that are going on here in Maryland.
Yeah.
So my thing is, when will Maryland possibly see a cost of living?
So there is no general cost of living increase for salaries. Like that doesn't exist. What every private employer can give raises as they want. But for state government workers or for city or county government workers, they each decide, working with their union, when they will give that COLA. But you're right, you're identifying exactly the problem that we have right now, which is that the cost of living has gotten much higher in the past 10 years, right? And that it doesn't really feel like relief is coming. There's a few ways to think about it. One is at either end, I will say, one is increasing wages and the other is lowering costs. And I would argue that we have to do both. Like we have to think about how to lower costs or stop costs from growing at the rate that they're growing. And at the same time, ensure that wages continue to grow. But if we're just talking about wages continuing to grow, it'll never catch up. And so I, focus a lot in my lane. Everybody has different things that they focus on. In my lane, I've been focusing a lot on cost of living because when we compare our economy to other economies, that's one of the challenges that we have in Maryland. So thank you.
Thank you all for your very thoughtful questions. Before we let you go, Comptroller, any final thoughts that you want to leave us with today?
No, I'm very proud to be BRHP origin story adjacent, and really proud of the incredible work that BRHP is doing. I want to thank everybody for taking time to be on this. This was a pretty wonky conversation, so you know a lot more, and I'm sure you all have sort of your own individual lived experiences that you could share to complement the things that we've talked about and add color and nuance to them. And I just really appreciate and am honored to serve in this role so that during my time, we can do as much as possible to work in partnership with you all and others, including the Moore Miller team, Attorney General Brown, Mayor Scott, and others, to create a state that's more equitable, that's more resilient, and that's more prosperous, so that every Marylander can really reach their full potential. And proud to call Baltimore City home. Raising two great kids who attend Baltimore City schools and live walking distance from here. So it's great to be here, and I'm really proud of all that you do. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all online as well as here in the room for joining us today for this BRHP In Conversation. Please stay connected with us through all our social media platforms so that you can catch our next BRHP In Conversation. Additionally, I want to particularly ask our clients, participant members, and anyone that receives our newsletter to pay attention to the emails that we send out, because there are actions you can take in terms of turning things around or providing some resistance about what's coming down the pike at the federal level in particular, which is going to have a trickle-down effect at the state level. So stay involved. Read what we send you, show up when we ask for some engagement. That's gonna go a long ways towards changing things for the better. Again, thank you all so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks again. Thank you, everyone.